Okay, and I'm not sure why that's there. We'll close that. Okay, so on page, what is that? 353, section 3.7, we're going to skip the chemistry stuff. And our goal here is to write a linear equation. Sometimes students think these are all different problems. That's one thing I've noticed as I've taught over the years is they're like, well, how do I know what to do on what type of problem? And they view every problem as different. When you're dealing with linear equations, you really only need to know two things. You need to know the slope, and you need to know the y-intercept. And if you can figure these out, then you can write an equation. And so remember, your slope is your rate. It's kind of how things change, right? Change in y over change in x. And your y-intercept is your starting amount. And so sometimes there's no math to do if you just can read the problem and figure those out. But basically, you need to know your m and you need to know your b. And if you can figure those out, you can write an equation. So I usually tell students, usually we try to figure out m first if we can, and check the box. And then we try to get b second. And then once we know those two, the third thing we can do is we can just write our equation. So y equals fill in the blank x, and then it's either plus or minus whatever our b is, right? And so we just have to figure out what this m is, this value right there, and what our b is. And then in a sense, we're just kind of filling in the blanks here. So let's look at this example. We've done linear stuff before. See how this is constantly going up by 3 and 2. So our change in y over change in x is 3 over 2. So right away, step number 1 is done. I know what my rate is. It's 3/2. Or maybe 1.5 if you like that better. So the problem is b. How am I going to figure out b? Well, 2 is a really nice number. Remember when we did arithmetic sequences? If I want to go back in time to start, so if I'm adding 2 to go backward to 0, I would subtract 2. So to go back to 0, I would subtract, what is that, 3? So what is that, 18? So here I add 2, so to go, I'd subtract 2. And here it looks like I'm adding 3, so subtract. So now I know what my b is. So, because real life always starts at 0. So at this point, I know both things I need. I know my rate, which always goes by my variable, and I know my starting amount. And there's my equation. So to put this in terms of real life, something that might make sense to you is maybe someone started out $18 in debt, okay? Like one of my kids bought an $18 item at Target and they're slowly paying me off. And again, 3/2 might not be as meaningful as maybe $1.50. So I'll put it in decimal form. So my kid started $18 in debt. They're paying me $1.50 every week. How many weeks till they pay off their debt? And so I can make this chart. It shows that after 8 months, they only owe me, or 8 weeks, they only owe me $6. They started out in debt 18. This is the rate they're paying me back per week, per month, whatever. And then I can say how much would they owe after 2 weeks, how much after 8 weeks, when will they pay it off? I can ask all those questions. But in order to write a linear equation, you need to know your rate and you need to know your starting amount, just like when we did arithmetic sequences way back when. All right, let's move on to the next page. Now on page 354, they show another option to find that equation. So the other option is to get your slope, which you could use the formula y2 minus y1, or you could just do the change in over the change in. So that was what? 3/2. Okay, we had that before. And then I like to say shove in 3 out of 4. So we have y equals mx plus b because we know it's linear. And if you know 3 out of the 4, you can solve this. So you know your input, you know your output, and you know your rate. And if you know those, then you can solve for b. So pick any point from that chart. Let's say 8, -6 was one of the points on that chart. So 8 is your input. So if I input 8, my output was a -6. My slope was 3/2 plus b. And then we can do algebra to solve it. So 2 goes in there, 4 times? I get 3 times 4 is 12. Again, you can do this on a calculator if you're not super comfortable with fractions. Adding, to get rid of adding, I would subtract. And notice I get b equals a negative 18, which is what I got when I did the chart backwards. It's just sometimes the chart going backwards isn't pretty. So my equation equals y equals fill in the blank. Your slope always has to be touching a variable because you need to know, it's like $1.50 per week. You need to know how many weeks. So you need a variable there. And then your starting amount. And notice I get the equation the same way. All right, let's do another example. Say I just give you 2 points. And I want the equation of a line that goes, say, 3, 8, and maybe 5, let's say 5, negative 6, or something like that. All right, so again, I like to get m first, then b, and then basically fill in the blanks if I can't. Now, sometimes you can't get m first, or it's not convenient. So to get b, I like to solve 3 out of 4 or do the chart backwards. But let's get m first. Again, I like to make my input-output chart, but you can do y2 minus y1 if you like that better, the formula. So what's happening here? I'm going down by what? 14, I believe, and this is going up by 2. So change in y over change in x. Looks like my slope is a negative 7. Okay. If you do the formula, this minus this minus this, you should get the same answer. And the nice thing is we can check later to make sure we're right. So there is kind of a built-in check on these, so you will know whether you're right or wrong before you get going. All right, the next thing I like to do is I like to solve in 3 out of 4. We can do the chart backwards in a second. So I got my m first. Now I'm going to shove in input, output, and my slope. So pick either point. I usually pick the nicer ones. So here's my input, here's my outer. So if I can avoid negatives, I do. There's my output. My input was what, 3. My slope was a negative 7, and then I'm solving for b. So to get rid of adding a negative 21, I'm going to add a positive 21 to cancel. So it looks like that's what, 29. Now, I might have made a dumb mistake. It's possible. I don't have notes with me right now. So we'll check our answer, and hopefully we'll catch the error. So we have that for our slope. And again, it always has to be multiplied by an x because this is a rate, and rates always have to be times something. And then it's a positive 29. Okay, so how do I know if I did it right? Well, I'm going to go ahead and put in the 2 points that I know. And I'm not just going to check one of them because it's possible one could work, but I want to check both of them. So let's put this one in. Negative 21 plus 29, does that give me an output of 8? The answer is yes. And then I'm going to try this input and see if it works. So negative 7 times 5 is what? Negative 35 plus 29. That equals a negative 6. So since this formula with this input gives that output, and this formula with this input gives this output, I know this is the correct formula. Now, what could be going on here? It could be that you have a science experiment that started at 29 degrees, and it is decreasing by 7 degrees every second, and what will the temperature be after so many seconds, and so forth. Now, if you want to get b by doing the chart backwards, we had what, 3, 8, and I skipped 4, so I'll do that, and 5, negative 6. And so notice that we found when we did the slope, we had what, negative 14 over 2. Sorry, this should have been a 5. Negative 14 over 2, and we got a negative 7. So this is going down by 7 all the time. So this is 1 and so forth. So think about if you're going back in time, just like what we did when we did arithmetic sequences, if we go backwards, because real life starts at 0. So I know it's going down by 7. So if I go backward, I would add 7 again, and add 7 again. And notice, just like we did with arithmetic sequences, I could get back to at 0 where it started. So the science experiment started at 29 degrees. It's dropping 7 degrees every minute, second, whatever it may be. And then this is the formula, the linear formula that would predict that. All right, what I want you to do is go on page 355 and see if you can try to figure out the equations for number 3. So page 355, try doing number 3, A, B, and C. Okay, so let's look at this first one. Again, remember you need to know M and B to write an equation. So notice I know M, so y equals Your slope is always by your x because it's a rate. If you make $10 an hour, you have to multiply it by the hours you work. You can't just say, oh, they make 10. Well, you don't always make $10. If you work 1 hour, you might make $10, but if you work 40 hours, you're going to make $400. So you need a multiplier. Now, notice this one's kind of tricky because this is your y-intercept. Do you see that? There's no math to do this. This is b. So you could put -8 or plus a -8, and you would be right. All right, let's look at the next one. You need to know m, and you need to know b. Well, again, they told you m, so your slope is 4. Now, notice they don't tell you b. So how are we going to get it? I like to sub in 3 out of 4, so I'm going to write my equation y equals mx plus b and see what I know. As long as I know 3 of these 4 things, I should be okay. So I know my input, I know my output, and I know my rate. And so that's enough to solve for the thing I don't know, which is b. So input is always your x, output is your y. So my input is 1, my output is a -8, and my slope is 4. And then I have my plus b. So -8, and 4 times 1 is 4. To get rid of adding a positive 4, I would need a -4 to zero that out. So it looks like b equals a -12. Debt and debt makes more debt. So I should be able to write my equation. Now, it's possible I made a dumb mistake, so I will hopefully catch it when I check my answer. So y equals, your rate always goes by a variable, and then your starting amount is its own little deal here. And if you put plus a -12, that's fine. All right, so is my slope 4? Yeah. Okay, now, does this work? So let's just check it here. If I sub in 1 for my input, I would get what? 4 minus 12 is a -8. Is that the right output? Yes, it is. And so I can get it that way. The other way to get your B is to make the chart go backwards. So I like subbing 3 out of 4 always works. Even if they don't give you the slope, if they give you the B instead, I can kind of go that route, which makes me kind of like it. But let's do the chart going backwards, and this is erasing really, really slowly. All right, let me grab a pen here. So if I make the chart to go backwards, what do I have here? Some of you are like, but you only have 1 point. Yeah, but remember I have the slope, which is a point creator. So I have 0, 1, 2, and at 1 I have the output. Now notice the slope is 4, which is really 4 over 1. So my change in y and my change in x. So as this goes up, change in y is going to go up by 4 for every 1 that it goes up on x. So if I go backwards and this goes down by 1, then this is going to have to go, what, more, oh, more negative, yep. So if I'm going forward, I would add 4 and add 1, so I'm going backwards. So I'm going to subtract 4, and I get my -12. And so that's how I can get that equation. All right, I'm going to pause and erase all this, and then let's do the last one. And again, if you need a hint, get the slope first, then figure out the b, then write your equation. All right, pause. I'll be back in just a second. Okay, so let's look at this next one. If I do this, this is going up by 2. And if I do this, it's going up, no, going down by 4, getting more negative. So change in y over change in x, and if I simplify that, it looks like we're at a -1/2. So that is my slope. Okay, I always like to get my slope first if I can. So now to figure out b, I'm going to sub in 3 out of 4. So notice I kind of do the same method on everything. I try to find m and b. All right, it doesn't matter. I'm going to pick this one, but pick either one. Input is a -4, output is 4, and my m is a -1/2. And then I have my plus b. Negative times a negative is a +2. Again, you can use a calculator if you would like. To get rid of adding 2, I would subtract 2 and get b equals 2. I'm not done. I got to write my equation. So y equals -1/2 x plus 2. Now, to check my answer, I will sub in both of these points down here and make sure it works. So half of -8 is -4, but I have double negatives, so +4 plus 2 is 6. Again, you can just type this in a calculator. Half of a -4 is 2, but I have a negative, let's see, half of a negative 4. Negative a negative, positive 2. Positive 2 plus 2 is 4. Again, you can check on a calculator. The other thing you could do to get b is go backwards here. So if you add 4, you get 0. And